On June 9th, 2006, the news broke. According to Palestinian sources, an Israeli shell had killed 7 people from the same family and wounded 30 at a beach in Gaza. Palestinian sources initially blamed shells from an Israeli gunboat. When the gunboat explanation failed, Palestinians claimed, with the help from a Human Rights Watch specialist,
that the family members were killed by 155mm howitzer shell.
Zakaria Abu Harbid, a cameraman from the Palestinian news agency Ramatan, arrived at the scene about a half an hour later while the last bodies were being removed and filmed approximately 8 minutes of rushes. He later received the 2006 Sony-sponsored Rory Peck Award for hard news reporting. His pictures of a grieving Huda Ghalia went around the world in minutes. Global outrage. Palestinian cries for vengeance.
Revenge, revenge, and destroy Israel, destroy America.
Hamas terminated its Hudna, the ceasefire, and the summer war of 2006 began. This is a classic lethal narrative, a story that inspires pity for the Palestinian victims, incites hatred of brutal Israelis, and calls Palestinian men of honor to violence. But how accurate is this narrative? There is no doubt that these people are dead, and shrapnel Israeli doctors removed from the surviving wounded confirms that they were victims of a blast. But let's examine the scene of the alleged crime. When we look closely at the scene on the beach, there is no evidence of an explosion from an artillery shell. If a 155mm shell had hit the sand, it would have left a huge crater. If it had exploded above ground, it would have flattened everything in a large radius. But in Harbid's on-site footage, we see no crater, and only meters away we have undamaged family possessions still standing. In fact, the Palestinians offered no real evidence to the media, only presenting admittedly non-related shrapnel, and the Human Rights Watch military expert could not sustain his claim of a 155mm shell in direct confrontation with the IDF specialists.
The family members were killed by 155mm howitzer shell.
On the contrary, the evidence strongly suggests a low-intensity explosion in which even the dead bodies were relatively undamaged. This corroborates the findings of the Israeli investigation, which concluded categorically that no Israeli shell was fired in that direction at that time. This conclusion deserves credence. We know that when the evidence of their own investigations indicate Israeli fault, they admit it publicly and apologize for the loss of Arab civilian lives as if it were friendly fire, and treat the injured in their hospitals. In this case, when wounded from the blast came to Israeli hospitals for treatment, the doctors were shocked to discover that Palestinian doctors had hastily removed all the shrapnel they could, at risk to the very lives of the patients involved. Were they eliminating incriminating evidence? Indeed, when Israeli doctors did take out fragments and forensic experts examined them, they established conclusively that the fragments were not from Israeli shells. In other words, the evidence strongly suggests that Huda Ghalia's family was not killed by the alleged artillery shell. Could the Palestinians have manipulated this location to tell the story of family day out at the beach, massacred by Israeli shells? In short, could we be dealing with another Pallywood production whose job is to turn any Palestinian tragedy, even one that's their own fault, into an assault on the viewer's emotions to blacken Israel in world opinion? Do Harbid's rushes contain evidence of manipulating the scene to make it photogenic and blame Israel? Why, for example, are these men throwing around the family's belongings? Are they rearranging things that should have been flattened by so powerful a blast? Why is Harbid messing up neatly packed items? Where are the signs of explosion, burn marks, blood among the family's possessions? Huda's brother, Aham, claimed to journalists that the missile landed in the middle of where we were. My father was behind me and I saw his stomach cut open with the intestines hanging out. He died in my arms. But then how did the mortally injured father get from the site of the explosion to sand dunes 20 yards away? And where is the blood on Aham's clothing? But if Israeli shells didn't kill the family, what did? Could it have been one of the numerous mines and booby traps that the Palestinians planned to stop Israeli commando raids landing on the beach? If so, would those who planted the mines not warn their people because to do so would also alert the Israelis? Experience suggests an unhappy answer. Palestinian militants often seem to show little concern for the safety of their own people. For example, on September 23, 2005, Hamas paraded live explosives at a celebration of Israel's evacuation of Gaza. The bombs exploded amidst a group of children, killing 15 and injuring dozens. Hamas tried to blame Israel, but this time the media was present and could not so easily be deceived. In the Gaza Beach case, as with the Jenin massacre, however, the media immediately and unquestioningly accepted the Palestinian accusations.
This report includes graphic content. Viewer discretion is advised.
This girl had been having a picnic with family members when artillery shells fired from an Israeli gunboat off the coast hit the sand.
Let's pursue the working hypothesis in which, as the evidence strongly suggests, this unfortunate family was killed by a Palestinian explosive that was intended for Israeli soldiers. What would this child's grief mean to the viewer in light of our awareness that Palestinians killed her family? In an interview with British journalists, Harbid claimed, "When I arrived at the beach, it was full of dead bodies. I saw Huda Ghalia running between her dead family till she arrived at her father's dead body, crying, 'Father, Father.' She looked at me and shouted loudly, 'Film, film.' At this moment, I recognized what a big humanistic message I am committed to deliver to the whole world with my small camera." Harbid also commented earlier to a German reporter, "She asked me to film her. She wanted to be seen with her father to show the world the crimes of Israel." Would he have made his humanistic message if he had known the Palestinians had killed Huda's family? What would we then think of the exploitation of this girl's grief by the very authorities responsible for her family's death? What would we then think of the manipulation of our emotions by people who seem far less moved by their own grieving Huda than they expect us to feel through our TVs and computer screens? What would the Western media's immediate acceptance of what Palestinian sources told them tell us about their credulity? Their haste in going public with accusations against Israel, their eagerness to package the conflict as the Palestinian David and the Israeli Goliath. And how much do such failures by our news media contribute to the ability of Palestinian leaders to exploit their own victims' grief in order to create hatred? What do we really know about the forces that bring war to this heartrending region of the world?